I'm Eva Noor, and I worked with Jeremiah Johnson and Jonathan Wins on this project for musical history. The birthplace of the classical era. So, in the context of the art, architecture, and culture of ancient Greece, the classical period does correspond to most of the 5th and 4th centuries BC, which are the most common dates being the fall of the last Athenian tyrant in 510 BC to the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC. Some facts about the classical era. Time period is 1750 C to 1830 C. Many composers and musicians were based in Vienna and also throughout Europe, so this caused Europe to be the musical center during this time period. Classical era followed the Baroque period and was then followed by the Romantic period, and because the classical era followed the Baroque period, the composers kept many styles of the Baroque tradition, but also put a new emphasis on elegance and simplicity. So, a little fun fact that we added to our slideshow. Did you know that during the classical period, which is known as the Age of Enlightenment in world history, schools and universities were established, as well as the first encyclopedias and dictionaries were published. The piano was invented and became popular, and the first concert halls were also built during this time. So, as mentioned before, the classical era is known as the Age of Enlightenment, or it is also referred to as the Age of Reason, and this included a genre of music that was written in Europe and is characterized by its elegance, balance, and homophonic textures. Classical music does include several forms, such as examples like sonatas, symphonies, and operas. 3 characteristics of classical period music. The first is simplicity, which had an emphasis on tonal harmony, single-lined melodies, and enlarged ensembles. This also included framing simple melodies and adding large ensembles. Melodies could be from folk music, arranged to produce musical development with various modulations in tempos, tonality, and dynamics. The second characteristic is classicism. Standard musical forms dominated the musical compositions, aimed to embrace order, simplicity, strength, and a celebration of humanity. The third characteristic of this time period is increased accessibility. Many composers did work in the courts of aristocrats, but public concerts were common throughout Europe. This allowed members of the middle class to participate in the musical forms, which helped this time period become more egalitarian than much of Baroque music, which was mainly presented as chamber music exclusively for the upper class audiences. There were many composers during the classical era. Some really great examples and well-known composers are Franz Schubert and Ludwig van Beethoven, as well as Mozart and Franz Joseph Haydn. We have a picture of Johann Sebastian Bach, and we also have a picture of Ludwig van Beethoven. Classical singers. Vocal music, such as songs for a singer and piano, notably the work of Schubert, choral works, and opera, which is a staged dramatic work for singers and orchestra, were important during this time period. Some examples of composers during this time were Mariana Martín, 1744 to 1812, Elisabetta dei Gambarini, 1731 to 1765, Franz Schubert, 1797 to 1828, and Anna Bon di Venezia, 1738 to 1767. There are many different types of instruments that were used during this time period, including string instruments, woodwind instruments, keyboard instruments, and brass instruments. So, we start with the string instruments, which are violin, viola, cello, and contrabass. And these instruments are still used in orchestras today. That you can see it being played by many different orchestras all over the world. There were some percussion instruments that were used during this time period as well, such as timpani, cymbals, Turkish crescent gong, musical glasses, and Jew's harp. And this is an example of timpani that's used. The timpani in this picture is the one that we see now in orchestras all over the world. Woodwind instruments: basset clarinet, basset horn, the flute, the oboe, and the bassoon. There are also some other instruments in this as well, and they were used in Europe. The clavichord, forte piano, and harpsichord were keyboard instruments used during this time period. The harpsichord did fall out of use in the late 18th century. Some brass instruments include the French horn and a couple others. The ophicleide is a serpent replacement percussor of the tuba. Thank you for watching our presentation. Hope you enjoy.